Okay, so now we're going to start with the creation of the product. Right click on your package, go to new and create a JFrame form. And then it takes us straight here to the JFrame form where we have to drag all of our components onto the calculator or the GUI of the calculator. So first we're going to add the text field to it, which will be used as the display of the calculator, and we're going to resize it after editing out the text. And now in this green area, we're going to have to add all the buttons, and I'll see you later when I'm done with that.
A few moments later.
As you can see, I've just dragged and dropped these buttons over here, and I've renamed their text to the buttons that I want to include in the calculator. As you can see, I haven't added the decimal point button yet because this is just going to be a simple calculator, and I myself being a beginner, I'm not too sure how to work with it. So here we have all the buttons, the number buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0, standard as you can see on any calculator. We have the four main operators, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Here we have a button called C, which defines clear. It clears the entire display of the calculator. And we have the equal button. Okay, so now that we have the entire design of the calculator, we have to start working on the code and how it works. So first let's go check how the code's looking. So each time you drag something onto the panel, the Java environment, in this case Netbeans, itself creates the code for it. So here we can see the generated code. It has the creation of all the text fields, the buttons, and the different text for each of the buttons. So now we need to work on what happens when each of the buttons are pressed. So let's go back to the design and let's focus on the button number 1. So here we have to go customize the code. Here we can already see that the text of the button has already been set to 1, and now we just need to add the part what happens when the button is pressed. In order for that, we have to first add an action listener, which implements an action when the button is pressed. So let's start. Once we've done that, we also need to add an import for the action listener. And now that we've added the action listener, we have to add something that will happen when the button is pressed. So we'll have to start off with action performed. So if and when the button is pressed, this is the action that will kick in. This also requires an import. If you did not know what an import was, it is when you make use of one of the features already provided by the Java environment. And now that we've done that, we also have to add the section of what happens once the button is pressed. So first we're going to create an event called digit pressed. This will kick in when the button is pressed. And then we're also going to add the final brackets. There we go. And now we're going to go back to the code, and as you can see, it says that we don't have an event called digit pressed yet. That's because I still haven't added the code for it. I will do that later in the tutorial. So now that we have an event called digit pressed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that that event will be the one that kicks in for each of the number buttons and the clear buttons. So in this case, all the buttons that affect what appear on the calculator's display. So what we have to do is that we have to copy the same code and reformat it for each and every one of those buttons mentioned. I'll see you in a moment when I'm done with that.
2 hours later.
So, as you can see, I've added the same code for each and every one of the buttons, each of the number buttons, and also J button 12, which is the clear button. So now I'm going to create the event called digit pressed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write the code off camera and then explain what it means on camera. I'll see you in a moment when I'm done with that.
1 eternity later.
So, as you can see, there are no more errors in the code. This is because I've already added the event called digit pressed. And here it is, right under that code. So as you can see here, I've created a new event called digit pressed, and I've also added the import for it. So I've created two different string variables. One is called text and one is called calc value. So the text is the text that's present on the button, and the calc value is what's already present in the text field. So if the text on the button equals 1, it just adds 1 onto the text field next to whatever was already there. If there was nothing there, the calc value would be 0. There would be nothing there. And I've done this for each and every one of the number buttons, and in the button where it says C, it just sets the text field to nothing. It removes all the text from it. Okay, just to show you how it works, I'm going to run the file and try to add a few numbers onto it. Okay, so here is our calculator for now. So let's say I want to add the number 12. So I've added 1. In this case, there was nothing in the text field present before, so it keeps it just as 1. There's nothing else on the field. Now, if I click number 2, as you can see, as there was already a 1, the calc value became 1 and 2 was just added right next to it. I can just keep going on adding numbers over and over again and it will still keep adding them on.
A few moments later.
So, now we're back at the design. Now we have to add the code for each of the operators and the equal button. So first, I'm going to show you what we're going to add for the plus button. Okay, as you can see, I've added the code for the plus button. I'm no longer going to show the typing of the code because the tutorial would just get way too long. So here I've done the exact same as all the other buttons, with the only difference being that the event is not digit pressed. We have to create a separate event for each and every one of these operators and the equal button because they do not do the same thing as the number buttons or the clear button. In this case, I've created an event called JButton10 action performed. The same will be done for each of the operator buttons and the equal button. So here, as you can see, I've created separate events for each and every one of the operator buttons as seen here, and I've also created a separate event for the equal button. Before we get on with the code, I want to show these 4 variables that I've created. One is an integer called first integer, which will be the first number inputted into the calculator. Another integer called second integer, which will be the second number inputted into the calculator. An integer called result, which is quite self-explanatory. And also, I've created a string called option. Whenever one of the operator buttons is pressed, option is set to the text that's present on the button. That's what will be used to determine which of the operators is going to be used in the calculation. Here is the code for each of the operator buttons. So whenever a number is entered into the text field, it is entered as a string or a text because the variable mentioned was string before. When we need to do calculators, we need to convert them into integers. So as you can see, I've made sure that in each and every one of those operators, the first integer is always converted from a string to an integer. And then right underneath that, I've made sure that each and every time one of the operator buttons is pressed, it scans the button and finds the text that's on the button, and it sets the text field to empty for the next number to be entered. The reason that the button has to be scanned is because that's what the equal button will use to distinguish between each of the operators. As you can see, the code is similar between each and every one of the buttons. This is because the only difference is made once the equal button is pressed. So the differences will be added into the code for the equal button. Here is the code for the equal button. First of all, I've made sure that once the equal button is pressed, the second integer that was entered is also converted from a string into an integer. Underneath that, you can see that I've utilized the option as mentioned before. So, if the option equal to plus, the result would be made equal to the first integer plus the second integer. The same method of distinguishing between the operators goes for each and every one of the other operators, the subtraction, the multiplication, and the division. And once that's done, the text field is set to the result. As you can see, that's it for the code of the calculator. The rest of the code has been formatted and done by Netbeans itself. All we have to do now is run the file and check whether or not it works properly. So as we can see, the calculator has popped up fine, the formatting and all has been done well, the calculator looks fine. And now let's try out some of the operators. 14 minus 5. As you can see, it says it's correctly 9. So now what we should do is clear it and then try another operator. So let's try 98 minus 56. And as we can see, it does it correctly as well. Now let's clear it and test the multiplication. So let's do 78 times 52. A large number. Let's see if it handles it. It's handled it perfectly well. And now let's test out the division. 98 divided by 4. And it says it's correctly 24. And this is actually a rounding off because we've only added integers. It cannot do decimals or half numbers. That's why it rounds it off to the closest whole number. In this case, the answer should not have been 24. It should have been 24.5. But as I said before, the fact that we used integers means that it cannot do that. Other than that, the calculator works fine. So there we go. That's how you make a Java calculator, a very basic one.